authority and toward a more autonomous or unbounded agency, one that, again, ultimately led to the United States Constitution. Now, in contrast to adults, then, children are the instantiation of the Lockean blank slates that acquire knowledge through accumulated and increasingly complex experience of and reflection on the world until they can govern themselves and others. And indeed, the framework that formally separates children from adults is traceable at least as far back as John Locke, whose political and moral philosophy greatly influenced, of course, American political theory. His epistemology, fairly novel at the time, held that knowledge is not innate, but acquired through sensation and reflection. And in fact, he utilized children, and I might add idiots, etc., to prove his point that there are no universal maxims imprinted at birth because children do not know what adults know until they learn it. So as vulnerable dependents, children do not have the capacity to govern, to consent, and children's temporary state of subordination, therefore, is justified by children's vulnerability. Now, it's important to remember that at the time in England, political office and participation were inherited, and children could be kings. They could actually hold office, so to speak. In turn, people owed allegiance through birth. That is, the father's allegiance passed to his son, even when the son became an adult, and his son in turn owed allegiance to his father's king, etc. So children were not really excised from the polity in theory, in that they could be office holders, and their political status and allegiances came through birth. It was a birthright. It was not through consent or campaign. Political participation was based on status and not based on reason. But as knowledge and power became more democratic, in the sense that it was accessible to people and through reason and observation, the distinction between those with and without reason became politically salient. Now, these changes undergirded the challenge to the authority of the American Revolutionary War and the subsequent social contract based on consent. I think these changes also helped explain the vulnerable dependent child and perhaps how we have come to view children in such small, narrow, and binary terms. That is, as physically, emotionally, and cognitively developing beings who are dependent during their childhood and then are suddenly, at the age of 18, entirely something else, that is, adults. Now, these notions of childhood were central to the formation of and continue to be at the contemporary core of American ideas about justice, liberty, and equality. And in turn, these political principles have excised children from the polity as office holders, voters, and participants, and instead children inhabit a childhood which is a stage of development toward becoming members of the polity. Now, this developmental, non-public child may be integral to the political order, but it is worth exploring the political aspects of locating the developing child in the family and at the same time privatizing the dependency of this child. Now, rearing children is a public and private partnership in which families impart moral values to children and affectional ties to kin that promote value pluralism within, of course, liberal norms, and an independence from the state that allows future citizens to govern rather than be governed. The state, though, does establish certain standards and requirements for education so that these future citizens can acquire the knowledge and skills that they will need to govern and also to support themselves and their families to continue the cycle of independence. But for reasons that are not entirely clear, I think, or essential to liberalism, the state has little other involvement in dependency. It provides famously stingy benefits to poor families, and provides families in general as well, and it provides general laws regarding health and welfare, including limitations on child's wage labor. But the state leaves it to families to provide for children during their dependency, and as it turns out, under our current socioeconomic conditions, this carries out to their adulthood. For the state has a very cramped distributive role when it comes to children. and that it leaves the distribution of wealth and resources to parents while putting its thumb on the scale in favor of those with higher resources and those who are more resourceful. And I might add, those communities with higher resources and who are more resourceful. Thus, children become the primary vehicle of wealth distribution. Now, historically, of course, wealth has been passed through children under primogeniture through the eldest, and in some ways we have retained this aspect of pre-liberal philosophy, although the rules of inheritance have become looser. So it's worth examining what other social and political purposes this privatized dependency serves. The childhood study scholars have found that children have long been important economic producers and also are central to the creation and maintenance of class and race. Children have been and continue to be important economic producers for their families, but they've also been deployed to support the economy from colonial days through slavery and into the Industrial Revolution and today. In fact, as opposed to the philosophical child of Locke, today's a social and material child developed in earnest during and after the mid-19th century. It was during this time that home and work became increasingly separate, and with it, childhood as a time of leisure and vulnerability developed for the middle and upper classes, while poor children, of course, were still helping to support the creation and maintenance of these classes. Macy's opened its first, the nation's first toy store in the last quarter of the 19th century. The medical specialty of pediatrics arose. Other professions, social work and psychology, developed, and forensic attention to children became more systematic after the first juvenile court in 1899. And all these developments constructed children as dependent and, most importantly, vulnerable, but did so in a time of a rising middle class and used middle-class children as the norm for childhood. In effect, though, these norms disenfranchised poor children from the category of childhood because poor parents do not have the material and political means to fully mitigate their children's dependency. At the same time, childhood's defining aspects of privatization, vulnerability, and dependency mask these differences and the disadvantages that poor children face. Middle-class children become the measure and example of childhood, and the deprivations poor children face are not part of the equation. They're a matter of personal preference and responsibility. Under current constructions of childhood, any political claims children may have to public participation or public goods are derivative. They come through their parents. Children have one of the most minimal claims against the state. In other words, this relegation of children to families individualizes social and economic needs and goods and obscures the political nature of childhood and of resource distribution. This privatization has enabled the state to rely on family resources to support children and to abdicate anything but the barest floor of protection and resources to children, and I might add their caregivers. The construction of dependency as a personal rather than structural matter has also contributed to the impoverishment of women who are caregivers and the individualization of wealth and poverty. The effects of this privatization for children and the adults they become are profound, particularly as social and class movement have become nearly stagnant, and neoliberalism has permitted even public goods like education and transportation to be in effect localized, which is to say privatized, because of class and geographic reification. Thus, poor children grow up without the same basic goods outside the family, jobs, transportation, schools, etc. And this means that middle class and rich children will share the benefits of economic development, health, good nutrition, decent if not really good education, college education, and social networks that will lead to opportunity and more productive and fulfilling jobs as adults. So I propose that we deploy this political child, or redeploy this political child, to help us reconceive dependency and justice. Despite the importance and opportunity of childhood for children while they are in it, and the possibilities that await them as moral and political actors, we treat childhood as politically discrete. Children are not political, or not seen to be political, and it's only at the age of 18 that they have the capacity for government. Abruptly, at 18, then they become moral and political actors, political beings. And once they become these adults, they are considered to be equal as moral